Welcome to Enhanced Connections, the cognitive future of customer experience. I am Vicki Jenkins with NelsonHall, and I will be facilitating this webinar. We will hold the questions until the end of the webinar, and at that time, you will be able to submit the questions through the tab on your screen that is part of the webinar tab. If you have technical questions, please use the chat function on the webinar panel. Next, I'd like to begin with a few words about NelsonHall. We are a global research firm that specializes in outsourcing, IT, and business services. We have been in business for over 20 years and have a reputation for thorough, in-depth research. We stand apart because all of our research is carried out by experienced analysts through in-depth interviews. We are pleased to have Ivan Kotsev as one of our presenters today. Ivan is NelsonHall's Customer Experience Services Lead Analyst with global responsibilities for customer experience services, research, and client support. Ivan is also a leading voice on how automation is revolutionizing the customer experience. We also have the pleasure of Siddharth Victor presenting today. Sid is a sales and solutions expert with over 15 years of experience in building new age support solutions and customer engagement strategies for companies in the TMT sector. At CSS Corp, Sid heads the Customer Experience Services line and is responsible for client success. I'm going to turn things over to Sid to share some details about CSS Corp. Sid?
Thank you, Vicki. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining from. CSS Corp has been in the business of providing customer service and technical support for a host of marquee clients across multiple industry segments for over 2 decades now. We've leveraged this strong domain expertise and our core DNA of support to help build a strong suite of cognitive tools, platforms, frameworks, and solutions with the primary purpose and objective of driving a better customer experience in the digital age. CSS Corp is the perfect intersection of being a customer experience practitioner and a digital solution provider. A number of global clients count on us day after day, transaction after transaction, to make sure their brands get a distinct competitive advantage in the market through a great customer experience. I'm happy to be a part of this webinar today and to share my views on how cognitive technologies are redefining customer experience. And with that, let me hand over the presentation to Ivan, who will give you his industry insights on the cognitive future of customer experience. Over to you, Ivan.
Thank you, Sid. Hello, everyone. I thought it's a good place to start our discussion today with some quick definitions of what cognitive customer experience means and what are the underlying technology. In popular media and some of the analyst industry ourselves, we tend to use terms such as bots and advanced analytics, which fail to distinguish between the different types of technology and models. So our definition is that unlike RPA, which is deterministic, cognitive technology is largely based on statistical techniques which are probabilistic in nature. Cognitive can undertake judgmental processes and adapt as it learns. Good examples are machine learning, deep learning, natural language understanding, and these are often built on Python and R. So when evaluating the market, we make an effort to distinguish between robotic process automation or automation of highly repetitive manual tasks, and then intelligent automation with some process orchestration built in, and then truly cognitive services, which transform digital process models. And historically, these technologies and models are more widely adopted in the middle and the back office, but now they are progressively expanding to the front office, which we'll cover today. But when looking at what is behind this focus on cognitive models, I think we need to take a step back and look at the overall driving forces shaping the customer experience market. There are 3 main directions where these forces come from. First is the competitive landscape. A number of industries are now disrupted by new economy players Previously stable industries such as retail banking, investment banking, insurance, real estate, among others, are under pressure from digital-first players, which often base their entire business model on delivering customer experience. Often, they don't own any assets or deliver services, but control and enhance the interactions. Classic examples are food delivery companies, which support the end user, the restaurants, and the drivers, and treat all of them as customers. Second is the changing customer behavior. I could have put various different stats to show how mobile internet has surpassed desktop browsing, how almost half of US users now start their product search on Amazon, or how for the younger generation, 18 to 34-year-olds, this is actually shifting to social media search. But I wanted to highlight the impact of social messengers, the WhatsApps, the Facebook Messenger, WeChat, how those channels have been massively adopted over the last few years, and they're now the entry point for a new generation of users. They become the main internet for a lot of them. And third, of course, is the technology. A lot of the tools that we had historically in the contact centers have matured. The accuracy of things like Google machine learning word processing is now at 95%, which is in fact the threshold that we humans speak. This allows for true virtual assistants and cognitive bots versus the more traditional bots with predetermined paths. A good example of this rapidly evolving technology are voice assistants. Amazon Echo and the likes are a channel that did not exist 3 years ago. And on this chart, I just pulled out some of the latest adoption numbers. So what does this mean for companies looking to improve their customer experience? The chart that you see here is from this year's digital customer service report that we did, where we asked companies to identify what are the current and future target benefits when outsourcing their front office, their customer experience services. While we are seeing a shift towards customer satisfaction targets and some other changes, the reality is that the list of KPIs is not substituting one for another. Cost optimization, volume management are still important, while digital channels focus on customer insights and revenue generation are becoming even more important. As a result, the number of priorities that CX operations need to manage is becoming greater and greater, while the resources, of course, remain limited. We also asked the clients to tell us what are the most important instruments today and in the future to achieve these different priorities. And there is a clear shift, as you can see on this chart on the right, in the use of effective omni-channel management and the shift towards the automation of both agent and customer processes. An interesting point is actually the increasing client demand for service design, user experience design, and consulting capabilities from their vendors. But I'll cover this shortly when I talk about some of the best practices in implementing cognitive technology. If we look at the more conceptual level, however, the specific needs of CS operations are actually expanding to a focus towards personalization and extreme personalization. For both outsourcing clients and providers, the personalization of the communication with the customer is the real differentiator, and cognitive technology are actually the key to achieve this at scale and at a manageable cost. Machine learning and natural language processing open opportunities in the contact center to predict customer behavior and microsegment, what's sometimes called the market of one in sales and marketing processes. In technical support, they are the backbone of proactive diagnostics and self-healing models, especially in the connected home and the connected vehicle environments. They're also the instrument to support live agents with contextual information when interacting with customers over this increasing number of channels that we saw. Channels that the customer has greater and greater control of the conversation. Typical example is the asynchronous nature of the chats done over Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. So what does this mean in terms of actual application? In the report, we've covered multiple use cases, which can roughly be grouped into 4 categories. The first is the live agent augmentation, which supports agent decision-making during the live interaction with next best offers, next best action tools. And these recommendation engines are not static. They adapt in real time based on the received information during the transaction, during the call, during the chat. The second group is customer understanding, using data to build 360 view of the customer, but in the context of the specific interaction, to deliver that level of personalization, which is the fundament of true omni-channel delivery versus a multi-channel support. The next group is automated interfaces, which is a way to describe all the different types of digital self-service for processes such as search, account management, different support scenarios, shopping, self-healing. And the last is proactive personalization of offers, of content, which goes across the touch points within the contact center and expands beyond into the marketing and audio, web, and digital properties. Now, the question, of course, is what's slowing down adoption of cognitive models? I remember in 2016, I was presenting before a group of executives and operational managers of a CX provider, and they asked me at the time why we don't see more cognitive implementation. And my answer was that in order to do it right, it takes quite significant investments and sizable commitment from the client organization, and also it's a time-consuming project. In the report, we identified several of those common challenges, and I've listed some of those here. For example, the lack of strategic focus from the senior management. Digital transformation of CX process usually a top-down change. Another example is the limited experience in transformation with dedicated change management resources and tools. We often burden kind of the operational staff with the tasks to execute change. Another challenge is the initial investment in IT infrastructure, often limited by legacy platforms, the ownership of the customer, which is usually shared between several departments, the multi-vendor environment where the scope of the applied cognitive models is limited to the service lines or markets supported by the provider, incomplete understanding of the benefits of cognitive and automation, unwillingness to commit to more advanced commercial models because the traditional pricing that we use are not necessarily suitable for these cases, for these transformational projects. And even the low demand from the customer base or the small volume of interactions to justify the investment. So looking at the case studies, we've identified, looking at the case studies, and also there were a number of pilots and examples through the report. We wanted to highlight a typical process for those successful implementation of cognitive analytics and bots in the CX function. Successful projects are led by dedicated consulting and transformation teams from the vendor side. And these are MBAs, domain experts, solution architects, process and technology analysts who get involved before the deal is closed. Their first step is to gather information, generate insights, and set up the operational model and the commercial model to support the introduction of cognitive. This includes assessment of the viability of the project. Not all processes, of course, and customer groups and products and services can deliver the necessary business results. Then there is the evaluation and benchmarking against the market and the technology landscape. Often providers are agnostic, offering both in-house platforms and the third-party tools. They make sure to integrate easily with legacy infrastructure and offer domain experience and know-how, which compared to a pure technology company, it's a benefit, usually a benefit. Then there is the setup of a governance model with a client, because launching a bot or creating a predictive model is not a one-off project. It requires not only continuous support from the engineers and the developers in the backend, but continuous buy-in from the different stakeholders, from the product owners to security and data officers. Part of this process are also audits of the digital transformation, which are outside the regular operational management routines that we have. And finally, a good practice is to have special venues and formats for the clients to explore with their providers opportunities given by this technology and reimagine their business from a customer experience perspective. Some of those components of good implementations include building customer models for revenue generation in support environments, customizing and localizing these tools, data management, which goes beyond the structured data sets within the contact center, achieving effectiveness in deployment of machine learning by significant calibration before the actual launch, and to move to more unified automation framework, where the big question is how to integrate all the different point solutions into a consistent self-service model. All these factors form a whole ecosystem of frameworks, best practices, platforms, resources, domain knowledge, partnerships, data sets, which make the difference from partnering with a simple chatbot developer, maybe a pure consulting company, and customer experience provider. I wanted to do a quick note on the technology side. Earlier in the year, we asked providers for a different report to give us their investment areas by 2020. And this look that you see here is from those providers that have presence in India, but I believe it's a good representation as a big chunk of the actual developments and implementations of those algorithms come from the country. As you can see on the right, the use of natural language processing, machine learning, deep learning, predictive and prescriptive analytics will double and triple in the next 24 months, which is a significant jump. And finally, I wanted to look a little further into the future and maybe take a view in how CX services will transform in the midterm, which for us means 4 to 5 years. If you focus your attention to the right, the three major changes that we identify are that cognitive automation will result in end-to-end straight-through processing with tight integration of those cloud-based CRMs and industry-specific platforms, domain-specific platforms. On the analytics side, cognitive services will be used in CX operational decision-making, both at the management level and also at the agent level. And finally, the partnership model between the providers and the company will include a high degree of innovation and a shared customer ownership. With that, I will turn now to Sid, who will share a little bit more about CSS Corp and their approach, some of their implementation in the cognitive environment. The company has been an active participant in our research in the space, and I believe offers some interesting examples and perspectives. So over to you, Sid.
Thank you, Ivan. Next slide. I wanted to start out first with providing a broad framework on how cognitive solutions need to be deployed in a support environment. And I strongly believe that in any deployment within support, cognitive solutions should be framed with the singular objective of driving a better customer experience by ensuring we lift and move the resolution as close as we possibly can to the problem, right? So let's break this framework down a little further, and to keep it simple, I'll break it down into three distinct prongs or three distinct phases, one interrelated to the other, as the customer journey flows from problem to resolution. So starting off with phase one or prong one, the attempt there should be to preempt or proactively resolve a customer's issue. This is a self-heal phase. What we're attempting to do is to resolve the issue before the customer even knows there was an issue or there's a need. I love the phrase, the best support contact is the one that never happened, right? Nobody necessarily wants to have to contact support if they don't have to. So this is a very key phase in ensuring that better customer experience. The key difference between being able to preempt and proactively resolve is proactive is more of a simplified format. There's usually a hard trigger that on top of which a rule engine or a cognitive engine can be deployed to be able to self-resolve. Moving to a preemptive state of resolution requires a higher state of maturity. It's not necessarily the best out of the gate strategy. It requires a deep learning algorithm to be able to identify user behaviors, patterns, and then be able to employ these same cognitive technologies to resolve in advance. In the event that we're unable to preempt or proactively resolve, we will move to phase two. So the next best thing for customers is to be able to help themselves without necessitating a contact into support. Now, the problem with that typically is that the content available is hard to wade through. Content is generic, and it's not usually provided to them in a format and a medium that's convenient or most convenient to them at the time of when the problem occurs. So what our solution does is it picks up from what phase one did and provides contextual and personalized self-help and self-serve solutions by aggregating user information, interaction information, machine learning, what the customer was doing at that point of quote-unquote failure, kind of structures all this together and presents it in a manner that's extremely palatable, contextual, like I mentioned, and integrated into a workflow that the customers are able to use to be able to help themselves. So this isn't your standard FAQs or self-help sections. This is tailored recommendations and actions that feed off all the data and user information from phase one. Now, if we're unable to resolve in phase one or phase two for whatever reason, and the contact does need to go into a contact center, the context can then be addressed twofold, right? One is you can ensure contextual interactions based on the information we have from the first two prongs and what the customer has already tried. We can have a bot that is completely channel agnostic, pick up the transaction, interact with the customer, and resolve the issue. If the customer needs to reach an agent for whatever reason, right? We have, again, enough of data from the first two phases that can be pushed into the agent to ensure that from the get-go, that interaction is absolutely hyper-personalized. There's also enough of suggestive data that goes to the agent to make them more intelligent, be able to troubleshoot and resolve more effectively and more efficiently. At the end of the day, nobody wants to have to call support or contact support, but if they do, bottom line is we've got to get their issue fixed, and we've got to get it fixed as fast as we possibly can. So this volume of data and our ability to hyper-personalize the interaction makes that contact significantly faster and make sure that whatever fix is provided to the customer sticks. Next slide. So next slide, with the new cognitive technologies, with everything, with all the tools, technologies, frameworks, with the adaptation in different parts of that whole customer journey within an organization, there's a whole host of ways you can deploy cognitive technologies. What I've tried to do on this slide is illustrate some of the key items that we can deploy within any organization that's going to have potentially the highest degree of influence in driving a better customer experience. So the first item is microsegmentation, and I even touched upon microsegmentation a little bit, right? It's the market of one. So microsegmentation in this context is our ability to move beyond just natural language processing or NLP and get truly into an NLU or natural language understanding state, where we truly, the cognitive technology, truly understand intent of the contact, context, etc., so they can further personalize and contextualize the interaction. We use tools like attribute-based routing to not only get the customer to the agent most likely to resolve their issue, but get them to an agent who holistically are more likely to engage better with the customer and at a deeper level. The entire structure and construct is truly treating every customer like the entire organization and all of its processes was built around them and to facilitate their needs. The second item is deep learning. You can also use deep learning algorithms to better understand user behavior from different vantage points of their interaction. So gone are the days of the one-dimensional view, which is why is the customer calling today and who are they? So we're looking at it from different vantage points like what were they doing before they contacted support? What are they contacting you about? How have the best interactions with them been handled in the past? What insights can we correlate between this interaction and across all aggregated interactions that we've had across our entire customer base? Then, how do we use all of this data at a macro level to orchestrate a more frictionless and cohesive journey for the customer across an organization? And this goes beyond just the support organization. This goes and delves into, based on these interactions, how do we make that journey better? How do we make data and information flow across any touch point that the customer might have with an organization? The third item is the deployment of cognitive search engines. Cognitive search engines can help make searching and interacting with knowledge bases, even your traditional knowledge bases, more intelligent and intuitive when compared to traditional searches. right? Traditional searches historically have been very, very ineffective, inefficient. Research across a number of different organizations show that quite a few customers try self-help and self-serve before they have the need to contact support. They just have to contact support because they're inefficient or they couldn't really find what they were looking for. Another great thing is we also ensure that any self-help articles provided, irrespective of what the medium of delivery is, right? Could be a mobile application, could be web browsers, but the self-help articles that get customized, personalized, and pushed out to the customers are integrated directly into the interface where the changes need to be made, if any. There's no worse experience than, for example, if you're reading through a knowledge article via a mobile application, then having to navigate somewhere else in the app to try and change something. So the integrated workflows, while is a simplistic change, right, and requires technology components at the back end, creates a great user experience on the front end. Next item. Everybody, I'm sure everybody on the call has heard of bots at some time or the other. If you're part of this webinar, if you're listening in, you've explored bots in some shape, form, or fashion. There's a number of different bots that can be deployed. We're still on the previous slide. There's a number of different bots that can be deployed to address specific user requests. They all have to function seamlessly in the back end to provide a unified front to the customers, but there are conversational bots that are more complex, decision-oriented, whereas information bots are more of a one-to-one interaction focused, and the augmentation bots are typically used to amplify or augment the agent ability and create a more hyper-personalized support environment that's fully context-aware. The next item is our co-intelligent support model. Now, with the entire solution to deploying cognitive, the objective should never be to eliminate human interaction altogether, but rather to create what we call a co-intelligent model where human interaction and machine learning work in perfect harmony to deliver that hyper-personalized and context-aware experience to end users. The bottom line is we've got to enable all the interaction data, all the user data, all the machine learning, and the underlying analytics to be able to augment agent intelligence to make support more effective, more efficient, and an overall better experience. Lastly, and I haven't touched upon this a little bit from a governance perspective, as cognitive technologies and bots become more mainstream, it's important to set up new governance mechanisms and models, not only to track user sentiment and experience. While they're important, it's also important to understand failures, shortcomings, and create a continual loop for improvement of these cognitive technologies, irrespective of where they're deployed within the customer journey and lifecycle. Next slide. So believe it or not, this is actually the simplified version of what we were wanting to present to you today. It's intentionally information rich, and the primary objective of what we want to show you on this slide is that simple truly is complex. In order to provide that very simple, seamless journey on the top end for customers across different life cycles, the back end and the underlying technologies are extremely complex and need to work together in perfect harmony to deliver that very simplified experience. So CSS Corp has a homegrown platform called Yoda. That's our cognitive technology platform. It consists of a number of different components that deliver different elements like mobile enablement of support, deep analytics that's actionable at different stages of the customer journey, CRM and knowledge management components. It's got bots, like I mentioned, conversational, interactive, information, augmenting bots, and RPA elements to be able to automate tasks and simplify tasks in the back end. The beauty of the platform is it's completely modular and has a snap-in infrastructure using APIs. One of the challenges that Ivan had talked about for adoption of cognitive technologies is a lot of companies ask us, What do they do with the existing technologies? What do they do to integrate the diverse landscape of technologies they've already invested in? Most of these organizations have made large investments in these tools and technology. It's also data rich, so porting, transferring becomes a concern as well. With the modular components of Yoda, what we're able to do is go in, consult, and identify the key components that are actually missing in that entire cognitive journey for better customer experience that I articulated earlier. Identify the missing pieces, pick and choose what they need, right, based on what their defined end objectives are, and then enable that wonderful digital ecosystem. So, for example, if an organization needs to have an authentication plugin, they do everything else from a support perspective, but in the event of enabling a cognitive solution, they need a authentication mechanism, let's say in the financial sector. We're able to pick a voice biometric solution, plug it into the front end. If it's on a automated chatbot solution, we're able to snap in a chat authentication mechanism that's separate from agent interaction to be able to authenticate before the bot interacts or before the contact needs to be able to be transferred to a live agent. Next slide. So the four key pillars that the Yoda platform rests on, the four key objectives that we try to drive using the overall platform is, number one, how do we enhance the customer experience? That's always been the primary front-end focus. We don't typically take on an engagement to be able to, how do we go in and drive down costs? It is our strong belief, and based on the implementations, our experience, that when you keep in the forefront enhancement of customer experience in a cognitive environment, cost optimization, efficiency building are all natural byproducts of that first core component. We also help organizations orchestrate that entire digital journey across multiple touch points, not necessarily just into support, but any form and touch point of interaction a customer has with an organization. There are a number of different revenue generation avenues that Yoda is able to enable based on historical interaction, based on proactive offers to customers, based on preempting needs, using historical pattern identification, better upsell, better cross-sell, greater basket size or cart size enablement, all focused on driving greater revenues from an existing user base or engaging a new user base. And all of this gets bundled into a nice outcome-based delivery model. Like I said, it's extremely modular. We simplify the implementation, we break down components that are required, and tie it all into a nice outcome-based pricing model that de-risks some of the typical reservations that customers have, and we hedge our risks on ourselves and on the implementation. Like Ivan mentioned before, this has at a very fast pace started to move more into the front office from the back office, but the underbelly of the platform can address all of these in unison to be able to provide that cohesive experience across the entire journey. Next slide. Some of the key differentiators and advantages of deploying a solution with CSS Corp. First off, we start everything out with a deep consulting engagement. We strongly believe that there's no one-size-fits-all. It's not a lift and shift model. We do a deep consultative exercise to be able to understand exactly what the client's objectives are, what's necessary, what's missing, and then come up with a comprehensive suite of recommendations to be able to orchestrate that full journey for a better customer experience. It is a completely risk-free deployment that is modeled on an outcome-based solution. So we bring the technology, we bring the tools, and it's a very simple one-resolve transaction type pricing model that we deploy for customers. Overall, the entire solution, there's a lot of data input that gets driven right from the consulting stage. So this is really even at the pre-sale stage to ensure that everything is context driven, that we build strong predictive models out the gate, and we set up a governance mechanism for ongoing optimization, ongoing improvement. It's never a one and done. It's always a continual loop for improvement and optimization. And like I mentioned earlier, the platform is entirely modular. It's a plug-and-play infrastructure. You pick and choose. We will articulate what's required, what's missing, and then our clients pick and choose what we need to plug into their infrastructure to make this entire thing successful. Next slide. So in order to tangibilize everything that I have just spoken about, there are three key examples of deployments that CSS has done that I thought it's important for us to share today. It should help cover the entire gamut of the different types of implementations that we talked about, the framework, the technology tools, etc. So to start off with, the first customer is a leading global networking company, and the problem statement that they came to us with is that they're launching a brand new premium product about 2.5x of what their traditional products would cost to the market. So premium product targeted at the premium segment of the market. That they were going to be deploying shortly. And the requirement was, how do we make sure that these customers get a level of experience that nobody else does? So what we did with them is that entire digital journey orchestration using a mobile-led out-of-the-box experience. So we designed components for them, starting with a mobile application. So just to give you an idea of the journey, what happens is the customer goes into a retail store, picks up a box off the shelf. They scan the QR code on top of the box, or as soon as they open it up, they have instructions on how to download the mobile application for the device. There is a super quick registration process. It's just putting their email address and creating a password. They walk through the entire installation process. The installation process is extremely simplified. It's designed after careful analysis to manage about 90 to 92% of their entire market segment. For more advanced users, which is the remaining 8 to 10%, once the initial setup is complete, there is an advanced section that they can go into to do more of the advanced configurations. So very simply, they set it up, and then they can use the application to do the ongoing management of the device. Now, it also has self-healed components. Initially, there's 4 different scenarios that we have deployed for self-heal. The future state is to add an additional 8 more to that to self-heal itself. It's also got the contextual self-help and self-serve engine that I was talking about. So if the customer is attempting to do anything on the app, whether they succeed or fail, if they go into the help section of the application, contextually, the top 2, top 3 searches that show up, they're dynamic. They will be based on what the customer was trying to do. So, for example, if they're trying to enable a guest wireless ID, or they're changing their wireless password, that will be one of the top FAQs. And if they click on it, it will not only give them instructions on how to do it, it'll also enable them to do it within that same workflow. All this information, if the customer chooses, they can interact with us through the mobile application itself. That becomes the gateway into support. So if they choose to call us through the app, it pulls all this contextual information into the contact center, so the agent is context aware before they answer the phone call. If they choose to chat, there's a chat bot that fields all the initial interactions, again contextualized based on what the customer was doing. And then if necessary, there's a seamless transfer from the bot over to the support agent. So that entire end-to-end journey, right from sale, pre-sale, setup, installation, all the way into support needs, are all orchestrated using our platform. Using this, what we've been able to do just on those on the top contact drivers, we've been able to eliminate or deflect, using the chatbot, about 40% of the overall interactions. There is a 11% comparative improvement in customer experience scores versus their traditional product set. And there is a 19% improvement in agent productivity and efficiencies in comparison to their standard product set. So overall, very successful implementation. We need to expand that out a little further and drive up that elimination and deflection rate. The second example is for a leading global VoIP major. We've done a couple of different modules. Again, this is a great example of the plug-and-play and modular nature of the implementation. So there's a number of different components that we've leveraged to implement for this specific customer. First being a preemptive resolution structure. So one of the contact types for this customer that had an extremely simple solution was if the issue occurs and the customer needs to contact support, the fix is only to power cycle the device, basically turn it off for 30 seconds and turn it back on. Now that it didn't necessarily seem like something that warrants a phone call into support. So what we did is we deployed a bot that's able to remotely sense, remotely monitor if there's a certain pattern in the customer's device log files. If we see it, what the bot does is it quickly remotely pushes a pulse to check if anybody's using the line. If they're not, it pushes out a second pulse that does a remote power cycle and then monitors the device to make sure that the pattern it recognized is eliminated completely. This has eliminated 100% of that specific contact type because that's all that was required from a troubleshooting perspective. Now, if it is a higher nature of an issue where we need further manual intervention, then that becomes a proactive notification into the NOC, and then that NOC creates a ticket to go and explore specific points of presence in specific domains to see how we can fix it. There's also a level of hyper-personalization that we do on interactions. So there is a attribute-based routing mechanism. So that once the contact comes in, once the customer has been identified on the IVR, we contextually route to the agent with the highest propensity to resolve the customer issue, as well as the agent who's best likely to engage better with the consumer based on a number of different customer profiling analytics that we do in the back end. Also, when that contact comes in, the devices are pulled in real time. So once the customer is authenticated before the contact actually reaches the agent, there's a significant chunk of information that gets pulled out, analyzed in real time. And so when the contact reaches the agent, usually it's able to very, very quickly identify what the issue is. If it's not able to pinpoint the exact issue, it gives them what the top 2 or top 3 likely issues are. It asks the agent to go through a series of questions to be able to identify which exactly the issue is, what the root cause is, and then resolve it. And again, if the issue needs to be escalated to the NOC, all the information gets collated, filled in automatically through a RPA process, and then pushed out to the back-end functions that need to be able to resolve that ticket. One of the key benefits of that level of agent amplification is that we've been able to drop training cycle time down from a overall 6 weeks across the entire suite of products and technologies down to just 2.5 weeks. And simply from an AHT reduction perspective, both using the RPA and the agent amplification, we've been able to generate a 23% increased efficiency in engineer capability. The last item is a cognitive bot for a gaming major that does just email and chat support. Now, this specific customer has a seasonal spike that goes up, that increases ramp requirements or contact requirements by about 300% to 400% during game launches. And after a lot of detailed analysis on user behavior, platforms, and contact types, it was identified that the bulk of the issues are actually from pre-orders or customers that bought the new game and are having activation issues or issues with in-game purchases that they made. And all of this has to do with activation code issues. So if the customer, for example, chooses to contact us via chat, what happens is the first line of defense now is a bot that gets deployed. The bot will check the user information. It'll correlate that user information with a backend database. First off, it'll check if the activation code the customer is using is correct. If it is, it runs a small script in the backend to reset the code and then lets the customer try it again. 9 times out of 10, that should fix the issue. Now, if the customer's code, the activation code they're providing is incorrect, then there's a series of questions that the bot needs to ask to be able to authenticate the customer, make sure they're the right user for the code they're requesting. And once authenticated, they will fetch the information from the database, provide the right activation code, which should be able to fix the issue. And in the unlikely event that this doesn't, then it gets escalated up to an agent who can immediately deal with the customer and typically address them with a replacement. So from a ramp requirement perspective, this has significantly dropped down from about 400% that they ramp up in season and then sharp ramp downs right after to about 150%. And with future deployments and addressing a few other use cases, we're hoping to get that down to about half of what it is today. It also, by virtue of us getting this customer information, so they have information that resides on different databases for different parts of this customer. So using our analytics frameworks, we're able to pull in all this information and be able to provide agents with a 360-degree view of the customer, their profile, their attributes, and therefore treat premium customers in a more premium fashion and allocate them to very specific resources. And those are the examples. Hopefully, was able to clearly articulate how the cognitive technologies, the frameworks, the tools that we've got in our arsenal are deployed in real life scenarios. Back to you, Vicky.
Thank you to both Sid and Ivan. If you have questions, please share them in the questions section of the webinar panel on your screen. If we do not have time for all of the questions, we can follow up with you after the session. We'll get started with the first question. Can you replicate a cognitive solution from one industry to the next?
So the simple answer is yes, right? You should be able to redeploy certain components from one industry to another. Not necessarily true, it's not true as a blanket statement for all industries, but components are replicable across industries.
Sid, I would probably add that it's easier to replicate across different use cases and service lines. So an example, an automation or a bot that's able to resolve one type of inquiry is probably easier to duplicate across several industries, of course, with the necessary customization. I think another element of this is how much is the ability to expand across different languages. What's your opinion on that?
I agree, Evan. I think at a use case level, it is definitely more easier replicable.
Yeah, and from a language perspective, from what I'm understanding, a lot of those taxonomies and dictionaries can actually be expanded to other languages, although the vast majority of examples that I've seen are in English, in fairness. Okay.
Great, thank you. The second question is, what are the security aspects of these technologies and how do you address the new regulations in the space, such as GDPR?
So I'm laughing because I'm thinking of actually the debacle that British Airways has recently gotten into. I'm not sure if is everybody familiar with the latest news about them, but they actually had a big data breach actually in the last few weeks. And from what I read initially, and this is just from the news articles, is that likely the break-in came through their chatbot. So there is obviously this challenge. I think one of the benefits from a CX provider view versus probably just purely technology company is that oftentimes providers have a more integrated approach. They've been historically managing vast amounts of data for their clients. They know where to base the servers. In the case of GDPR, they would base them in the European countries. So from a kind of a practice perspective, I would say that probably CX providers have a better control of this process and better establish a governance model.
I agree, and CSS Corp really is, like I said in our introduction, that perfect intersection of being a practitioner and a digital solution provider. So all of the programs across everything we manage today are all GDPR compliant. There's information security standards that we manage to. There's PCI compliance. So we're well aware of how that data needs to be secure, where it needs to reside, who needs to have access, what types of controls need to be deployed on top of them. And those same controls and mechanisms are employed across all our platforms as well. The deployments for different customers work in different methodologies. We have on-prem deployments, which is entirely on the customer premises. We have cloud deployments. We have hybrid deployments, and each are secured in their own way to make sure they meet all these the security standards and requirements.
Great, thanks. We have another question. What is the industry viewpoint on cost spent on automation versus human agents? And what is the threshold/break-even point in terms of context at which we see the cost benefits?
Well, let me start, Sid. I think there isn't an actual standard at the moment. I think the view that I'm most often seeing in the market is not just a cost calculation. For a lot of those implementations, the benefits expand beyond just potentially slashing a couple of seats, reducing the population of supporting staff. I mean, obviously, it's a direct benefit of that. But if you look beyond that, I mean, error elimination, reducing, improving the quality of work for the agents, it's a massive boon. That's why I think a lot of the focus at the moment is actually using those models and those technologies to improve the customer experience and actually generate additional revenue. I mean, a lot of the projects that I've seen are using analytics and bots and those recommendation engines, which have a greater capability than what we historically have, to improve the performance of a cross-sell and upsell program, or maybe inbound sales interaction, to customize the actual offer at the very level of the customer when they're interacting. So it's not just, oh, this is user X or Y, but this is the user X or Y in the requirement Z in this specific situation. So I think this is one of the thinking. Error elimination, just improving of things like fraud prevention. I mean, there is the whole range of implementations. It's not just limited to let's optimize, the 200 Cs that we have. And of course, it's a direct result of this. Sometimes it also comes with the opportunity to expand the type of work that the agents do. I mean, we have to be honest, a lot of the tasks that we currently handle in a contact center are very repetitive. They might not necessarily require very high level of skills. Eliminating all those and eliminating them in a way that enables the agents to do a higher value tasks is what actually can improve things like employee satisfaction, attrition rates, a lot of the challenges that we have in CX operations.
And just to add to that, Ivan, I think just while there is no industry standard that I'm aware of either, just without looking at any of the other ancillary benefits, right? Just as a pure play bot interaction reduction, I think about 40 to 50% lower from a transaction cost after all your technology investments and everything, I think is an acceptable range to be in. Now, this again doesn't consider any of the other components that Ivan just talked about, all the elimination component, all the agent amplification that increases efficiencies, that creates better sales cycles, that increases first call resolution, so therefore reduces repeat callers, increases self-help and self-serve adoption. So without all of that, just at a very core transaction level, I think about 40 to 50% from a pure play bot implementation is doable.
Great, thank you. And we have time for one more question. The question is, the big players in the industry have the resources, but what about the small guys like startups? How can they leverage this tool efficiently?
I think this is more geared, I think it's more easily adoptable by startups than any of the big boys. I think big boys find it harder to move. There's a lot more siloed approach and structure when trying to deploy this. So therefore, it makes the deployment implementation deployment a lot harder. Startups, being as flexible and nimble as they are able to move quicker, faster, integrate a lot of different facets of their customer touch points to be able to deploy this more easily. Now, from a how do we deploy it perspective, again, the way we specifically deploy it is completely outcome based. It can get boiled down to and be as simple as, for every resolved bot interaction or cognitive platform interaction, I'll charge you X dollars, right? So it can get boiled down to that level of simplicity, removing any types of heavy CapEx or heavy overload, and just make it an OpEx based model.